Hey, greetings, friends. How you doing there? So today, I thought we could talk about not the divine feminine, but the divine masculine. Because when I talked, I think it was the last time, I dropped one of these. Look at my hair is all messed up. I just took a shower. I mentioned the war on women, right? That war on the feminine, both the biological feminine and the divine feminine, which are of a piece. And I said, also, if there's a war on the divine or on the feminine, there's a war on the masculine. And I think that's nothing could be clearer from our social environment these days. And so it's deer season here in Michigan. So I've been spending a lot of time not finding deer, sitting in the deer blind, just thinking about stuff. And I've been thinking a lot about the divine masculine. Now, here's the thing, right? I think the divine feminine is easier to define than divine masculine. Because it's a weird thing with the divine masculine. I had a lot of contemplation about this. And what I think happens is the divine masculine, and the way I thought about this was kind of examining world religions, also mythologies, and the role of the masculine in there, and in particular the role of the father, right? Because I think in a way the fulfillment of the feminine, even though I know it's not universal, is the bearing of children in the biological in the biological feminine, and similarly in the biological masculine, fathering children, and not just procreating them, but being a father is the job. That's the gig, right? That's the assignment for not everybody, but for most people, or for a lot of people. Though it's becoming the assignment less and less for. Well, I think it still is the assignment, but less and less people are actually becoming fathers. And of course, we know that even though you might have a father, and I think we have this littered across the cultural landscape, that it doesn't work out, right? You have fractured relationships with your father, or you don't know your father, or your father is broken, or whatever it happens to be, or absent. But I think that's I think when we start talking about those things, it's very tragic, right? But I think it's part of what the divine masculine is. I know this sounds weird, right? Now, and it's also, I think, the abandonment of the father. Because there always comes a point where your father has to abandon you. You have to figure things out. Whether it's when you're a baby, like a boy named Sue, or later in life, abandonment is part of it. We don't like that. We do not like that. Which I think, if you're abandoned, especially as a man, by a father, then you cling to the mother in a way. And the thing is, if you look through mythologies, and even through the Christian mythos, the father is absent, right? So many times the father is absent. The Odyssey, right? The Odyssey is a quest. It's a father quest. It's a father looking for his home and hearth, and a son, Telemachus, looking for Odysseus, looking for his father who's been gone his whole life. I mean, that is the archetypal story of our age. And of course, even with Jesus, his abandonment on the cross, right? Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? This is the archetypal position of the masculine, in a way, the divine masculine. And it's really weird, right? Because you don't think I want my daddy to love me, right? But I think this is part of what it is, and I think the divine masculine is related to, we can call it trauma, because I think about people I know, not just men, women, everybody I know. It's like almost nobody, I can't think of anybody who isn't suffering from some kind of trauma. And I think I mentioned before, I've gone to a couple of these estuary conferences, and almost the leitmotif at these things is you know, trauma, very often religious trauma. I mean, and especially think about, call no man father. How many people were abused by priests or people in authority, right? And not only that, maybe they weren't even abused, but they were ignored, right? Or something happened, like you had this father figure who let you down. And I think that's part of. I mean, I don't think it's a good thing, but I think it's like I think with sociology, people say, isn't that kind of mysticism? Like, no, it's an accurate description of the world as it is. And I think with the divine masculine, it's also an accurate description of the world as it is. If you're thinking about it in the terms that I'm proposing right here, in terms of overcoming trauma and overcoming feelings of abandonment, or we could probably add a bunch of different things to this. And I think, like if you look at the stories of the heroes of the Greeks, right? Theseus, his father, who's his father, and very often the case, you find out later in the story, his father is really a god, which is really what we all want. That's the father we're looking for, the divine father. But he's absent, right? Christians call God Father, right? But he's absent. Is he there? Is he not there? I don't know. I talk to him. But where is he? And where is the Father? Where is my Father? I mean, and I think this points to even Star Wars draws on this, right? With Luke and Darth Vader, because talking about having a fucked up father, right? But I think that's the myth. I mean, that's the story. That's our story. And I think what it is, and this is, I'm puzzling. Work through this with me, people. I think what it is because this is part of the human condition, whether it's real, imagined, or felt, of the absent father, the absent masculine. You got to work your way through it. And I think this is the whole story of initiation practices. And not just like initiation into manhood, but I think what we see in myth, where the hero has to go on the journey, right? Because you have to figure out who you are or what you're made out of. And until you do that, and I'm talking to you dudes, you cannot be a complete human being. But unfortunately, we live in the architecture of our culture right now discourages that. In fact, it decries boys who they have that sense, right? They got to figure it out, and they have to figure out how to be masculine, how to be men. What does it mean to be a man, right? And we have so many of the elements of the cultural architecture, and schooling in particular, that do their best to emasculate, or I would even say castrate. It's castration anxiety. You want a castration anxiety? Go to a public school, or even Catholic school. And it deprives that. There's no forum for that. And so you get out these boys, and you can kind of see it recently with the rise of, on the one hand, you get the smoking dope in the basement and playing video games, quest for the father, which is what it is, or a quest to self-medicate, and while you're looking for the father at the same time, and be destructive. I can kill stuff and not really kill stuff. But the other side of that is the attraction toward, I would even say, and this is going to be crazy, toward Nazism, which we've seen some of that, right? Or toward you have those people who are getting into Teutonic, the Teutonic gods. They're praying to Odin and stuff, or Thor or whatever, right? But you also see it with the kind of cosplay you see with the ortho bros and with some Catholic traditionalists. I'm just being a masculine man and leading my family in prayer, whatever, right? Those are all attempts to recapture what has been lost, and sometimes they're successful. Most of the time I would suggest they're not, or at least only partially successful, because we don't have a way to be initiated. But how do you do that? And we don't have. I mean, joining the Boy Scouts isn't going to work because plus now they let girls in, right? I don't think joining the Freemasons is going to work. What's gonna turn you into a man? But I think all those things are kind of shadows of a system of initiation, but there's not a real one. And I think a great example of this is in the story of Parcival, or it depends on which translation you or which version of the story you get, right? From Wolfram von Eschenbach in Parcival, or Chrétien de Troyes, I call him Christian Detroit, because I'm from Detroit, and his Le Comte de Graal. Percival. I'm sorry, Le Comte de Graal is the other one, which I don't like. Because it's about Galahad, and he's about the farthest thing from an initiated male as you can get. Sorry. What's it? Malcolm Guite. I know he really likes Galahad. I do not. But Percival, I can relate to this guy. So the story, if you don't know it, you should read it. And I would read the Eschenbach version. I think it's the most complete version. Though the Chrétien one's good too. But what happens with Percival is, and this is classic modern culture, right? His father is a knight who's killed far away from home. And his mother doesn't want the same thing to happen to Percival. So she hides him in the forest. Doesn't let him know about knights, about swords, about nothing, right? But, as they say in Shakespeare and other kinds of literature, the blood will tell. And, if you know this, like you don't let boys play with guns, what do? They make guns out of sticks, right? So it's the blood will tell. And so Percival makes javelins, and he kills animals with them. And then he cries about it because, whatever. His mother, his nose it'll make his mom mad or upset. He doesn't want to upset his mother. It's classic. I mean, this is so Freudian, right? But what happens with Percival is he runs into these knights, and he's like, that's what I want to be. I don't know what it is, but that's what I want to be. And so he goes off in pursuit of that. And his mother, of course, does not want him to go, but she can't. She can't stop him forever. So she tries to sabotage him going into the world. This is classic Freud. So she'll sabotage it, and so she puts him in armor that's made from, puts him on a broken down horse. Sometimes it's an ox, and then he wears like willow branches for armor. He's just ridiculous, and he goes off trying to figure out how to be a knight. And he goes off and he has these adventures, and I won't get into the whole thing. But what happens is he gets a lot of advice from women. And so there's definitely a feminine mystery to Percival. The divine feminine is speaking to him. And he's seeking the Holy Grail, which one way to think about the Holy Grail is a feminine symbol. In addition to being a symbol of the Last Supper and sacrifice. So he gets a lot of great advice from women. But he gets bad advice from women too. His mother gives him some advice before he leaves, and he follows all the advice. It's the worst thing he can do. Similarly, Percival bumps into some men out there, some father figures. And they likewise give him advice, which is actually good advice. But good advice taken in the wrong situation is bad advice. And so everything he does falls apart. And he doesn't achieve the Grail the first time he encounters it because he was following advice. Because if you know the story, when he first sees the Holy Grail, he's like, and he's got the wounded king there. I mean, this is what we're talking about, right? With the father, the wounded king, right? The Fisher King. So he's wounded. And Parcival wants to ask, what is wrong, uncle? But he doesn't ask him because Gurnemans, who is kind of his mentor, older knight, tells him knights never ask stupid questions. They don't shoot their mouth off like you've been shooting your mouth off about what your mom said to you. And so he doesn't ask the question. But that's the time he should have asked the question, right? Because after he ignores the grail, well, he doesn't ignore it, but he doesn't ask the question in front of the grail, which would heal the Fisher King. He doesn't know that, but he really wants to ask the question. His intuition is right on the money. His instinct is right on the money, but he doesn't ask the question. And so he lets it pass. He wakes up in the morning, everybody's gone at the castle. And finally a page yells at him from the rampart saying, "You fool. If you would have asked the question, you would have cured him. Now he won't be cured because you're the only one who could cure him." And I think, and then he's got to go through all kinds of, adventures, but not just adventures, struggles. It's a beautiful story, story of struggle, and not just, I wouldn't call it self-improvement, which is so lame, but initiation into life. And I think, in a way, Parzival is the perfect story for our times because it's an initiation both into the masculine real and the feminine real, and as a result into the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And it only comes from leaving the nest, from leaving the comfort and making yourself subject to risk, right? To trial, to open to failure. And he fails a whole bunch of times. That's why I hate Galahad. He never fails. He's like that really perfect captain from the football team. I hate that guy. But Parzival is different, a different story, right? And I think the trauma of Parzival with his absent father, the trauma of the Fisher King, right? The trauma of blowing it, which he does numerous times. But I think that also connects to sacrifice. And I think that's an important part of not only the earthly masculine, but the divine masculine, is that you got to sacrifice, right, for others. And a lot of people aren't up to that. A lot of young men, I think, are not up to that, whether it's sacrificing for those they love or their families, or if they have children, if they're children. A lot of them aren't up to that. Or even they're afraid to even have children because they don't want to sacrifice for anybody. It's all mine. What'll happen to all my money? I think we see that with a lot of, what do they call them? The dinks, the dual income, no kids. Yeah, that's not a good look. Plus, it's not only is it not a good look, it really sucks as far as the future of humanity goes. So I think, in him, I'm going to say what people have probably been thinking. Well, what about Jesus? I don't think Jesus is the divine masculine. I think Jesus is his own thing, right? He's outside of time in a way, even though he's within time. He's outside of time and outside of the norms, because he is divine. But he's not the divine masculine because he's not a father. He's not a husband, right? The best thing he's got going for him is he's a Capricorn. He's a carpenter, but also that he does sacrifice. So in that way, Jesus emblematizes the divine masculine. But I think God the Father is the divine masculine, and even Jesus calls him Father, right? Nobody calls Jesus Father. But it's kind of an interesting thing. Or St. Joseph, I don't think St. Joseph is kind of a good example of the divine masculine because he sacrifices for others, right? I mean, he go and take the child and his mother into Egypt. Okay, he gets no words in the Bible. He just acts. So that's very masculine, very much a fatherly role. But I think, as I was saying, I wonder, maybe John the Baptist is also, got shards of the divine masculine, but he's kind of wild, right? It's like Enkidu to Jesus's Gilgamesh. Enkidu's the wild man, and so is John the Baptist the wild man. But he's not a father. He's not a husband. At least there's no evidence of that. And people will go, what about Mary Magdalene and Jesus? Yeah, no. There's no evidence for that either, even wishful thinking at best, because it's different, right? But that doesn't take away from the importance of the divine masculine, and for Christians in particular. And I think for Christians in particular, you kind of have images of that in the chivalric code and the tales of chivalry, like Parcival, or like King Arthur, or the Mort d'Arthur. I've talked about that a whole bunch of times. Which even there, it's the divine masculine and the divine feminine, compromised by tragedy and trauma. But I think this is, I think it's an important thing. I don't think people think about it in these terms. When usually you hear people talk about the divine masculine, it's very stereo. I wouldn't even call it an archetype. They're stereotypes of the masculine. But I think if we look into an archetypal realm, there are certainly the wise old man, or the Merlin figure, right? That's a very masculine thing. He doesn't have a husband or a wife or children that I know of, though he does fall in love, which leads to trouble. But the knight, I think, in a way, is probably the archetypal image of the Christian divine masculine. Right, and I think there's probably an element of that in Islam too, at least in medieval. I don't know about it anymore. But something to think about, and certainly I would love to hear your thoughts down yonder below, and let's keep the conversation going. If you have anything else you want to suggest, please suggest away, and I will see you next time. Take care.